Hello and welcome everyone to the Influencer Active webinar. This is Growth Hacking Your Startup with Influencers. My name's Gavin Heaton and I'm joined tonight by Anthony James and Corey Warfield.
Howdy.
AJ, could you give us a quick introduction from yourself, and then Corey will jump over to you and get your intro as well.
Sure, Anthony James. I'm the founder and CEO of Influencer Active. This webinar brought to you by Influencer Active. I think hopefully many of you follow my profile on LinkedIn. I think I've just clocked over 2.7 million followers on LinkedIn. I run my own consulting business in the innovation and technology field.
Great.
Corey, right to you.
Corey.
Hi, everybody. My name is Corey Warfield, and I spent about 20 years working in restaurants before I started my first technology company 5 years ago. LinkedIn's been an instrumental part of that journey. I'm now in leadership and ownership of about 7 tech companies touching everything from DeFi and blockchain, data privacy, labor law compliance for the restaurant industry, and I do some stuff on the side helping people grow on LinkedIn. We all want to be Anthony J when we grow up, so I'm just happy to be here.
Awesome.
Thanks, Corey.
So influencers, why are we here for this webinar and what are we going to find out? So the reason that we're here is because we know that influencer marketing is growing gangbusters. In 2021, we expect it to be about a $15 billion industry. And you can see by this graph that it's growing at around 50% year on year. So it's a fairly significant industry and it's growing at an astonishing rate. And what we also know is that there are more and more platforms and more agencies coming into the space as well. So the growth is being propelled not just by the number of brands and the number of influencers out there, but also the demand for those influencers. So what we're going to be exploring today is how influencers can be engaged through startups and with startups to actually help you grow your startup, grow your business, grow your product line, validate your products and so on. But really then the challenge is, how do you engage those influencers? How do you engage them well? How do we tap them in this really challenging space? Because sometimes when we think of influencers, we just think of the glamorous model type influencers. And as you can see, Anthony James and Corey Warfield are just like that, just exactly as you can see, without the sunglasses, obviously. So when we're talking about influencers and how we generate new products, let's have a think about that, and let's think about what does it mean to generate new product ideas. AJ, can we start with you? Can you give us a quick overview of what you think?
In relation to how we generate new product ideas and how we engage influencers in that area, sure. The first big part really is finding your influencer. There are, as you just outlined, Gavin, thousands and thousands of platforms and sites out there. It's how do you find the right influencer? How do you find the influencer in your domain space? We've got 2 sets of influencers. There are the B2C influencers, the celebrities, if you like, and there are others out there like Corey and myself who are business people. You know, we haven't been in movies, we haven't been on television. I don't think you have, Corey, I'm not sure, but we're not necessarily celebrities. But over the last 5 to 10 years, we've built significant networks of influence, and there's many, many of us out there. And now we've brought them all into one place, into a digital marketplace. The key is finding the influencers that sit in your domain space. I work in innovation and technology as an example. There's a significant difference between cybersecurity and cosmetics as an example. So I typically wouldn't post about cosmetics. So when we want to generate a new product idea, it's about finding the right influencer, working with that influencer, giving them a good brief, but letting the influencer use their knowledge in your industry vertical as well to help start a discussion, stimulate your idea and start building a conversation. What I do for a lot of the people that book me on Influencer Active is actually do a number of posts. We play with different posts. You could call it, A/B testing. Sometimes we might post a video, or we might post a an image, we might try different hashtags. So it's allowing the influencer to use their voice to start the conversation around your product idea. That can really help stimulate that growth and knowledge of your idea or your platform.
Cool. And Corey, what about you? What in terms of video? Because I know that you're involved in video production and in demonstrating products online. How do we use video well? What's the story?
So for me, a big thing, especially on a platform like LinkedIn, is being really mindful of other people's time and using a little bit of psychology. What's going to get them to stop scrolling through their newsfeed? Most people are on LinkedIn to make money somehow or another, whether they're there to sell themselves, sell a product. And so with the videos, it's all about getting them to want to stop scrolling. So you need to have something captivating within that first second. And a lot of times when I actually do videos myself for products or to help promote people, one of the things that I want to make sure is that it's super short, and that there's some element of speaking with my audience, not at my audience. And I think a lot of the creators and a lot of the people that are looking to, quote unquote, go viral or become a name on social media show up, thinking that they're just going to teach people everything that they know, which is almost condescending, or think that people just need a little bit more, inspiration, although you can find that all over Instagram and other platforms. So I think just understanding your audience, what it is that they are hoping to see while they're on LinkedIn. And if you can meet them there and have a conversation with them, you can kind of sneak almost anything in as well. So, right, you offer some type of a value, and then you talk about a cool product that's coming out, and they're getting the value anyhow, but the leave behind is that there's a new product.
Got it. So that's in many ways what you're doing is you're prompting conversations, right? So you're building these relationships in very short form ways. And by the way, I love that mug.
Thanks.
So AJ, what would you see as being one of the ways that you can manage these conversations as they're starting to take place online? Is there any tricks and tips for that?
Well, I think Corey raised a really good one, which is sort of being respectful of your audience as well. And that's not only being respectful and not wasting their time, but being respectful when they engage in your content, when they ask questions or they leave comments on your post, to engage with them, to answer those questions, to provide additional information, not just sell to them. We see many posts where people are actually asking, where to buy that product, and often, it makes a lot of sense. And what I say to a lot of the brands that I work with is, answer those questions. That's the right thing to do. If they want specs of your product, or give them those specs, give them that additional information. And the comments are a really good way to do that. So, that conversation builds rather than selling to them immediately. You can build a conversation that eventually turns into that lead to lead them to your website or to lead them to your LinkedIn business page. So it is important in managing that conversation that your brand's team is ready, that they're engaged, so you can respond quickly. So somebody doesn't ask a question and it goes 3 or 4 days and nobody's bothered to respond. So that respectfulness, that professionalism is very important in managing those conversations.
Yeah, I can see you nodding there, Corey.
Well, and one thing to mention, because I'm obviously a huge fan of Influencer Active, I'm an influencer there as well, and I've made a lot of money and helped companies make a lot of money there. But the one thing that I'll just kind of put a finer point on is typically they'll say, hey, can you tag our CEO, or can you tag our company? And my answer is always the same. Absolutely, as long as they understand that I need them to engage anyone that I tag in a post. And I encourage anybody watching this to be mindful as well. If you tag a person or a company in your post itself, the algorithm is literally watching to see if they engage. Because if you tag a person or a company and they don't engage back, it almost weighs it as spam. They think that you're annoying the person. So if I tag the CEO and they don't engage, right, they're just glad that they're tagged, but they don't want to go on and throw a like and a comment, it's going to hurt that post performance. And I tell them they're paying for the views, right? They're paying for the fact that I can get 50,000, 100,000, 500,000 views on a post. If they ask me to tag the company and the company doesn't engage back, that post might get 3,000 views. It might, right? Or whatever it is. And frankly, sometimes 3,000 views to the right eyeballs can be better than 1,000,000. So I don't want to conflate things too much, but for the most part, a lot of this is algorithmic. And it's right. The term people often say, it's not rocket science. So I say for this is computer science, right? It's literally just algorithmic. And I'm fortunate. I have friends that help build LinkedIn, right? And I talk to them about like the algorithm and some of the use cases and edge cases. And I do a lot of A/B testing as well. But I just wanted to make sure that people do understand it's phenomenal to make sure that you're tagging companies and leadership, but you don't get the full value unless you engage back.
Spot on. I agree 100%.
Fabulous. Hey, I'm just getting some great questions here through, and I thought rather than sort of sticking to our format, we might just jump in with a question because, this is about startups and being a little bit agile. And Emily DS has asked, is it possible to have a direct approach with an influencer when we have a newborn startup, or is it better to use the usual way?
Well, Corey, I'll go first if you like, but I'm not sure I know what the usual way is. But platforms like Influencer Active are phenomenal for startups. We actually have a lot of startups, a lot of people are launching on Kickstarter and some of these startup platforms as well. That with a marketplace like Influencer Active, you can find and match the influencer to your startup. So if you've got a startup, let's say in construction, you can find an influencer that understands and works within that industry vertical that may have worked in that industry vertical for 25 years. Whether you're a startup or not, you get that credibility that comes with an influencer that's worked in that space for a long time and that has significant impact.
Cool. And Corey, do you have some thoughts on this one?
Absolutely. So, I think with anything, it's all about strategy and implementation. And the strategy is to talk about things before you need people to know about them because you want to create a buzz. So what I would say is even if you have something in ideation stage, or even if it's somewhat in shadow mode, if you find the right person or people that have the right audience and right, that transcends numbers, but you want it to be a vast audience, you want it to be a targeted audience. And if you can get those influencers or those people to start talking about something that's really exciting, right? I wish I could tell you more, but we've got something coming out in the DeFi blockchain space that will literally help people make money off of their data, right? The product doesn't need to be live for people to start getting excited about that. And I think the only caveat to that is you don't want to go stale. You don't want people to get really excited for something that ends up not coming to fruition. And people don't go every couple of weeks to a landing page to see if it's live without some type of a prompt. So you do want to make sure that the timing aligns, but definitely the time to get people excited and to start evangelizing is before you need them to know about your product or your offering.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Emily, and we've also got another question from Emily as well, which is sort of straight into that same zone around how do we need to how do we find capital with just an idea, or do we need to have a product or experience? And I think, Corey, when you were talking about building buzz, that's kind of where we're going in that direction, right?
Absolutely. And people do invest in, excitement when you can get a little bit of that fear of missing out. But for the most part, investors, they have a fiduciary responsibility, and most of them are quite disciplined. They don't typically invest in ideas. What they like to see is they like to see the social proof with the traction. They like to see revenue, and they like to have a formula that they can kind of just throw money at. And the verbiage on that is throwing gas on a fire. If there's no fire, the gas is somewhat frivolous. And so I always encourage people to get really creative, really resourceful, find ways to get that minimum viable product to the market, find ways to get people either putting their money where their mouth is. If people say they'd buy your product, get them to put some money down. You can get people to buy products before it's even released. And so there are a number of ways to get creative, but outside of like friends and family or, potentially some grants from a government or things like that, I'd say focusing on getting those early customers and that early revenue is so much more beneficial than focusing on trying to get investment before that stage. Because once you have some revenue and once you have some customers, people will then be lined up to invest money at you. But I will say in the diligence process, every investor is going to do a few things. They're going to check out your LinkedIn page, they're going to check out your company LinkedIn page, and they're going to see if people seem excited about you and what you're doing. So absolutely the time to start to build that awareness and that excitement is before launch, or even before necessarily trying to go out and raise money.
Ah, brilliant. Great answer. So it leads us into this next one, actually, which is how do we reach new audiences? So AJ, if we think about exactly what Corey is talking about there and what Emily was asking, how do we work with and how do we find the right influencers to work with?
So you can go down some of the more traditional routes, and I would say some of the harder paths, and you can reach out. You can check out people's LinkedIn profiles. You can reach out to influencers on LinkedIn. Maybe they'll respond, maybe they won't. You can go through the hard yards of negotiating a price, or you can make it a little bit more simple and you can use a marketplace like Influencer Active where, all those business people, those influencers are already there. What we've done on the platform is we've actually set up filters. So, to find influencers that work directly in your industry vertical, it's really easy to filter for those people. You can look at them not only by industry, but also those in your region. So if you're wanting to tap into, let's say, a US marketplace, relatively straightforward. You can pick some great US influencers. Corey's up there, used by a number of brands and startups. We've got Dave Alto, who's now asking questions as well. We've got Strati Georgiopoulos as well. There are some great, US influencers that you can work with that typically, if they work and they live in those markets, they've also got large followings within those markets, but as well, global followings as well. You can look at their previous posts as well. Look at the content that they've posted. Look at the sort of engagement and responses that they get. That's generally some of the better tips for choosing the right influencer to work with.
Cool. And Corey, in terms of working with influencers, how do you introduce a product or a brand? What's the craft of doing that, and why would you work with an influencer to do so?
Yeah, so I think a lot of times, just like a good presentation deck, what you really want to be mindful of is postulating both a problem and making it bleed and the solution. So, to AJ's point earlier, you don't want anything too disparate. If somebody were to ask him to do something about, fashion and makeup, it might not resonate. I mean, with almost 3 million followers, I'm sure there are people in there that care about makeup and cosmetics, but, I think he's known for cool technology, right? Someone like myself, I'm known, you might not be able to tell by this by this shirt, but I am known a little bit more for haberdashery. So I've had a number of companies come to me with cool clothing concepts, and right, I did the shirt sauna, and then a cool hanger, and then a new shirt with interchangeable buttons, and my network really resonated with that. So I think just going and seeing who their audience is. I think some of the platforms have made it really easy, and obviously, not just because we're here talking about Influencer Active, but they're the ones that I think have made it the easiest to go on and really just see what influencers care about, what their audience cares about, and kind of, helps you don't need to necessarily go through and look at 100 profiles and discern, right? If you can see 10 people and 2 of them say talk about what you care about, it's really easy to just go and verify that and then get the word out that way. So I think that it comes down to alignment and just a little bit of strategy at high level.
And I'll add one thing to that as well. It also does come down to your budget. So I noticed Dave Alto's another influencer on Influencer Active popped up a question there. You can for a relatively small spend, because again, we're not necessarily celebrity influencers who may be charging you $20,000 to $30,000 per post as an entry. You could take a couple of $100 and spread it across 3 or 4 different influencers on the platform, and try influencers that are not necessarily in your industry vertical but closely aligned to tap other audiences.
So we also have a question from Adam Kramer, which is partly on this topic as well, which is around building relationships with influencers and building them into the journey of that startup. So what are your thoughts on that? How do we go about doing those things, AJ?
Well, look, I'll touch on the part of the journey and how to work with them in your industry. We've made it with the Influencer Active platform really easy. They're there. There is no middleman. There are no hidden costs. There are no hidden fees. Influencer Active as a marketplace sets up that one-to-one relationship between your brand, your startup, and an influencer. So if you want to engage Corey, you might not have his phone number or his email address, but you can certainly engage him through the Influencer Active platform to get his attention. There's a question up there from Stephen right now. The best way to get his attention is to actually engage through a digital marketplace where we have already curated. Everybody up there has been curated and vetted for their following and their influence. And that's where you can brief them. You can upload your brief. You can upload your media. And they're there and they're really ready, willing, and able to engage with you in getting that post out there and live. We've done the hard work in actually finding them. I don't remember the second half of the question, sorry.
No, that's all right. That was a great response. And Corey, you've got a comment?
Yeah, and Stephen and Adam are both amazing guys, so I wanted to shout them out. But to Adam's point, I've now, and somebody who I don't know if they want to be mentioned, but that I've seen on this call already has asked me to join their organization. And we were introduced via Influencer Active. I've also joined 2 advisory boards for companies that have retained me there as well. So I think the way to get them involved long-term is to get them involved short-term, right? If you hire an influencer to talk about your product for a couple $100 and they like it and the post does well and you like them and you reach out and say, hey, that did amazing. As an example, in 2 days on the 1st, a company that myself and some of the other influencers on IA did a campaign for that was successful, now have another one. And it's a familiar concept of 10X, but they're kind of tying it to their company. So a number of us are putting out these 10X videos in a few days and all pointing back to that company. And I think they have some ideas to try to engage us longer term, but that all came through a booking on Influencer Active. So I think just developing that rapport and those relationships can turn into, pretty much anything if the alignment is there.
Mm-hmm. Great answer. We're starting to see more questions come through. So if you do have a question, by all means, just drop it into the chat window, and we'll get around to it. We've got about 8 minutes left in this conversation. But another question from Emily, which I'd like to throw over to Corey and also to AJ, is it easier to approach influencers outside Europe when you are a European startup? So what are some tips there? And we're going to talk a little bit about that idea of how do we reach other markets, right? Thoughts on that, AJ?
It's very easy. It's very easy to approach somebody in Europe or outside. I'm based in Australia. Corey's based in the US. So if you needed assistance outside of Europe, my following is very heavily skewed towards Asia Pacific. I've worked and lived across the entire region where, Corey is US based, and Corey, I won't talk to your following, but it's very easy. And with the map function within Influencer Active, it's actually very easy to select influencers that are not within your region. Whether you're a European startup or a US startup, you can find those influencers, in any market that you want to target very, very easily.
Cool. And Corey, your thoughts on this one? How do you work with influencers, or how do influencers work with brands from other regions?
Yeah, so I'd say on the one hand, I often say that LinkedIn is a free global 24/7 networking event. So you absolutely have access to people in every continent, every market. But I will just kind of give an insight as far as make sure you know who your total addressable market is. So if it's a European startup that is offering something that solves a problem specific to Europe, or maybe GDPR is a concern, right? And so if GDPR is your concern, that is European based. You might want to find somebody a little more local. But just yesterday, I did a post on LinkedIn and mentioned a German company, Fondian, that does impact investing in their outlet, Bangalore Robotics. It's literally helping clean the ocean of all the plastics and making it better for marine life. Like, I love what they're doing. So I shout them out. They're global, based in Europe. And for whatever reason, the algorithm does show that post to more people in Europe. So I think there's an element of the algorithm trying to match things for us as well. But with that said, I think just understanding your audience and then finding the right influencers that have that audience.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. We've got another question here from CubeX. Influencers versus opinion leaders. Great question. Often a problem in tech industries is that opinion leaders are not really influencers. So how do we connect in with both of those? Opinion leaders and influencers.
Corey, you want to go first?
Sure. I think there's a lot of fun quotes about opinions, but I imagine, in a broader sense, we can call opinion leaders and thought leaders the same thing. I think maybe thought leaders sometimes do have a bit more sway and influence, but I think it goes back to that alignment. If you have something that's very niche, or maybe the verbiage and the articulation is only going to resonate with industry experts, and you don't want to break it down for the layperson, that thought leader, that idea leader, opinion leader is probably going to be more targeted. If it's somebody that speaks to labor law compliance, I might choose someone that speaks to labor law compliance to 3,000 people over somebody that speaks about tech to 3 million, because one of my products keeps companies compliant, with the Fair Work Week and predictive scheduling laws. So to me, it's really just about identifying who it is that needs to hear the message and with whom it'll resonate, right? 3 million people don't care about predictive scheduling. So it would be a misappropriation of resources to go out and cast that wide of a net. Does that make sense?
I would agree with Corey's perspective, and I think the question goes to the heart of really the difference between the B2C and the B2B influencers as well, because most of the business to business influencers have built their influence and impact through that thought leadership, through that opinion-led approach. I can certainly, I did a couple of posts actually just recently for Microsoft talking about, edge computing and the Azure cloud. I've worked in that space. I've worked with that technology for a long time. So, a lot of my audience look for content around that space. When it comes to some other topics, not necessarily, because I've never expressed an opinion, written about it, or shown any thought leadership about those areas. So I think it is a big differentiator between the business to consumer and business to business. So I would say the business to business influencers are probably more of the thought leaders or the opinion leaders, rather than influencers just based on size of network. None of us have over 200 million followers, right, Corey?
You're on track.
So we have another question, which is, can you help startups connect with influencers?
Yeah, I think the question is there. I would say, if you want to connect with influencers, whether you're a startup, whether you're a small to medium business, Influencer Active and marketplace.influenceractive.com is the place to go to connect right away.
So you're certainly in the right place for that conversation, right?
Yeah.
The other question we have here, also following on from Emily's question before, which was around cultural differences. So are there cultural differences that we need to be aware of? There certainly are, that we do see from, say, for example, brands that we're working with in Asia, and the differences that they have within countries and within the region and external to the region. Same thing for Europe. But in terms of an influencer engaging with the different mindsets that are required, are there any nuances that we need to be aware of? AJ?
Yeah, look, I certainly think there are. I think one of the big keys, Emily, is to let the influencer use their voice. It's great to give your message and an understanding of what your product or your offering or your service is, but when a brief is maybe cut and paste, this is what I want you to say using these 50 made up hashtags. Most influencers who know how to generate an audience, engage their audience and generate engagement, know that doesn't actually work. So the more that you can actually give them your message, but let them, if you like, translate that to their audience or translate that into their own voice, typically the better the post will do. One of the things, Corey, I'm sure you can back up is, putting links to external websites into posts doesn't generally work well. Let the influencer, work the post. As a good friend of mine said, ride the algorithm. We know how to do that. And the best way is to get your message across to the influencer, but let them put it into their own voice.
Yeah. So we're actually almost at time now, and I would like to be respectful of everyone's time, especially Corey is up early for us. Corey, have you got a few last minute thoughts on working with startups and influencers?
Yeah, so I think at the end of the day, it really is a relationship, right? So finding people that you think will represent you well, people that you would want, potentially a longer relationship with. And on social media, and LinkedIn is a really, almost prime example of this. The law of reciprocity is huge. So in order to get more engagement on the platforms, engage more. And so that's we can extrapolate that out to working with the influencers as well. A lot of this is all about amplification. So think about, if you amplify something, it's going to get bigger and more visible. Make sure that you have that right message, right? Make sure you have the right timing, because once you start to get that attention, you don't want to break an app or a website. You don't want to sell out and get people upset that they can't get this thing they got really excited about. So the law of reciprocity, just making sure that you show up in the right places. Be nice, be professional, but also make sure that you stand out. And from my experience and from a lot of the people in my circles, pretty much anything can be accomplished professionally through LinkedIn right now, and especially when you leverage the right people, such as the people you'll find on Influencer Active.
Awesome.
Well said, Corey. Well said.
Great. Well, we'd like to thank everyone for joining us at this webinar today. Like we said before, try an active influencer today at marketplace.influenceractive.com. You can register for free, and you can book an influencer, find an influencer, and engage them either short or long term at your leisure. Again, thank you for joining us, and this webinar will be available for replay later on, probably in about an hour or two. Thanks for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again at our next webinar.
Thank you.